Hello and welcome to the Modernizing and Securing Financial Services Technology Environments EcoCast event brought to you by Actual Tech Media. On today's event, you'll hear from experts at KnowBe4, Gigamon, Nutanix, Sequence Security, and Duo. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this event. If you haven't been on an EcoCast or MegaCast event before from Actual Tech Media, you should know that the format of this event is fast-paced, high energy, and you'll learn about the most innovative enterprise technology available to you today. On this event, we're honing in on modernizing and securing financial services technology. And as such, you'll hear from each of today's presenters for roughly 20 minutes, followed by a live 3 to 5 minute Q&A. And we've asked the presenters to focus in on how their technology solutions can help modernize and secure financial services. Now, before we get started, we have a little bit of housekeeping we first need to cover. We will have some prizes. I'll talk about those in just a moment, as well as the eligibility requirements to be considered for the drawing. We want this to be an educational event. So we have a questions tab right next to the handouts tab. Just click on questions, and that's where you'll want to enter all your questions throughout the event. As I said, we'll have a dedicated Q&A session with each of the presenters, but keep those questions flowing throughout the event, and we'll queue up the best questions for the live Q&A. We want to help you get all your questions answered. There are no dumb questions. We also have some questions for you. We'll be asking you some poll questions, and I'll be sharing the results of those polls with you. We want this to be a social event. I'll be tweeting about the event with today's hashtag. If you go to the bottom of your console, there's a Twitter icon there. If you click on that, the hashtag for today's event will be automatically appended if you tweet using that Twitter widget. And then finally, resources. We have resources from each of today's presenters there in the handouts tab. Now, this is a completely live event. If you have any trouble, I encourage you to first try a refresh on your web browser. 9 times out of 10, that will resolve it. If something does go wrong, as it can with live events, we appreciate your patience in advance, but hopefully today will be a perfect event. Now, we said we had prizes. We've got 3 Amazon $500 gift cards. We'll be announcing those at various points during the event. If you click on the event schedule or the event agenda, there's an icon on the bottom of your console for that. You'll see exactly when we'll be announcing those prize giveaways. To be eligible for the prize drawings, you must be present on the live event and meet all the prize terms and conditions, which are found at the bottom of the handouts tab. There's a link there to the event prize terms and conditions webpage. All prize winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media. Now, Actual Tech Media is making a donation to the Bushfire Emergency Wildlife Fund to help those affected by the Australian fires. If you win a prize today and you would like to donate your prize value to this charity, we would love to help you do that. And if you don't win a prize today, we still encourage you to donate to one of the great charities that's helping Australia recover from these devastating fires. The hashtag for today's event is ATM EcoCast on Twitter. You can follow Actual Tech Media, and you can follow David M. Davis, that's me, as well. I should also point out that you'll find all the latest and greatest Actual Tech Media content over on our LinkedIn webpage. You can follow us there. In fact, if you go to the top right-hand corner of your console, you'll see icons there for our LinkedIn page, our YouTube page, and our Twitter homepage as well. You can also find Actual Tech Media over in the iTunes Store, where we publish the 10 on Tech podcast. Now, before we jump into today's presentations, I want to first do a little bit of level setting or stage setting here. Some of us are more involved in financial services, IT, than others. I think it's good for us to all have a foundation to start from where we talk about the challenges that many financial services companies are facing today. And after I talk about what I believe are the challenges, I'm going to do a poll and ask you what your challenges are. So the first thing to know when it comes to modernizing and securing financial services IT is that FinServ IT is unique. It's different from other verticals. And maybe we should first define what the FinServ vertical is, or financial services. It includes insurance, real estate, banking, tax planning, and investment companies. And it's unique because it's highly regulated and much more focused on compliance than other verticals out there. And because of that, traditional financial services organizations might not innovate as rapidly as other verticals, but I believe that that's changing, especially when they're being pushed by newer startup fintech companies that are pushing the innovation in financial services. I'm talking about things like leveraging cloud, mobile banking, mobile payments, all the things that us as technology people really start to appreciate when we as consumers consume financial services. The second thing to know is that security is critical when it comes to FinServ IT. If you're in FinServ IT, I'm sure you already know this, but this is the reason that you'll hear so much about security on today's event. Financial services companies have to deal with so much PII, or personally identifiable information, financial data. And as you know, when you hear about a bank or an investment company in the news that's had some sort of data breach, their customers and the public are going to seriously lose faith and trust in that financial services company. And the third point I want to make is that financial services industries are much more prone to attack and fraud than other industries. That's because there's so much to gain if those financial services companies can be breached. And our very first presenter from KnowBe4, I know we'll be talking about the various types of business compromise that financial services companies are being hit with. With security and compliance being important, visibility is also key. And you'll be learning about how you can get greater visibility into what's happening in your network, what's happening with your security from some of the solutions you'll learn about on the event today. And then finally, compliance is a must. If a financial services company is not compliant, they're not going to be in business for very long. We've got some great solutions lined up for you today on the event. KnowBe4, Gigamon, Nutanix, Sequence Security, and Duo. Before I introduce you to our first presenter, let's do a couple quick polls. All right, so the first poll you should see on your screen here is which of these are you most challenged with in financial services IT? And this is a multi-select question, so you can select more than one answer here. And I'll be sharing the results of this poll with you so you can see how you stack up with your peers from financial services IT who are on the event today. And if you're selecting other or not listed, feel free just to put your challenge in the questions tab there. I'll share those challenges with everyone out there because I'm curious, what I missed actually on the list and what we can add to this poll for the next time. I see a lot of good responses coming in. Thank you for those. I'm not going to care to make a prediction at this point because I don't want to change the results or influence the poll in any way. But again, if you put not listed, use the questions box there and I'll be sharing your challenge with everyone who's on the event. So I'll give you a few more seconds to answer this one. All right, lots of good responses coming in. Thank you, everyone. So let me share the results and take a look at that. 76% said security is their greatest concern. By far, that is the greatest challenge or concern in financial services IT today, followed by 59% said compliance. And after that, 40% said data protection and DR. After that, 28% said aging and legacy technology, and 26% said keeping current on technology. So thank you for responding to that poll question. Very interesting results. I'm actually going to screenshot that and share that over on social media because those are very telling about what's going on in financial services these days. All right. Next poll, one more poll before I introduce you to our first presenter, and that is, what's your time frame for selecting new IT solutions? You have these challenges. You're looking for some solutions to help you. What's your time frame for that? I'll give you a second to answer that poll as well. All right, thank you everyone who responded to that poll. And with that, it's time to get started with our first presentation. Here we go. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Eric Krohn, Security Awareness Advocate at KnowBe4. Eric, thanks for being on.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. This is that time of year we need to talk about some fun, and that is the BEC and tax scams that are going to be running prevalent. We're already seeing a few of those trickle in. So we want to chat a little bit about that because we know that this is something that happens every year. I hate seeing the stories, so the more we can help you all understand what to prepare for, the better off I think we are. This is me, again, Eric Krohn. We're here with KnowBe4 out of Clearwater, Florida. My background has been in IT and security since the mid 1990s. I've worked with the Department of Defense. I've worked with ISC Squared as a director of human relations, or I'm sorry, the director of member relations and services. And I've seen a lot of things throughout my life and throughout my career, and that's why the human thing came to mind there. Humans are so often the targets of things, and that's what we're going to talk about here, is how these things kind of come into play during this season. Again, Know Before out of Tampa Bay. We are the world's most popular security awareness training and simulated phishing platform. We help train people against this sort of stuff. That's really what we do. We get to see a lot of these also because of how ingrained we are in this. We get people reporting us these new scams, these new attacks all the time, and I get the pleasure of being able to look at a lot of these and look at it from the psychological standpoint, how they're doing these attacks and how we can prevent them. So let's move right into this. First of all, let's talk about what is BEC. Business email compromise, BEC. It's basically it's basically a con or a scam. And the thing about BEC is it can happen through the phone, it can happen through email, it can happen on text messages. There's lots of different ways to do this, and it's kind of the overarching umbrella over a lot of these social engineering techniques, right? Here's an FBI quote here. It's deception. Basically, that's what it boils down to. Now, most people are familiar with the attacks that are um, they're really the ones that are wire transfer fraud based. Okay. These wire transfer fraud ones are the most common, but there's several different ones as well. So, for example, W-2 fraud is also in there. That's every year they're going after the W-2s, or the tax forms related to employees. Now, they take that information, which has everything you need to file your taxes, essentially, and they file the taxes for the employees on behalf of them. So kind of them. Everybody magically gets a return, and unfortunately it goes to the bad guys. The bad guys take off. By the time it comes time to file your own taxes, you find out it's been done for you, and that kicks off a whole mess. So that's W-2 fraud. And then gift card fraud as well kind of falls under that BEC umbrella. um, a lot of times what will happen is they'll target executives or a person of authority, and they'll use that authority to get people to give up the money, the information, transfer the funds, do whatever it is. Again, this is about deception. This is about tricking people. Sometimes they'll get into the executive's actual email account. Sometimes they'll just spoof them. Sometimes they just use a generic email address too when it comes to the email based attacks. So we'll see a couple of those examples here as well as we move on. The thing is, most of the time, they try to make it look from somebody that has some sort of authority, whether that's an executive, whether it's a regulating authority or something like the IRS, FBI, something like that. That's what they really play for. Now, how successful is this? Well, unfortunately, very successful. So we're talking about $26 billion in identified losses between October 2013 and 2019. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. And the amazing part about this is really how simplistic these attacks are, yet how successful they continue to be. So the tools that they use, the tricks that they use in this really is is social engineering. It's manipulating people's feelings, emotions typically. And this is why I say one of the key things I tell people over and over again is, if you get an email, a text message, or a phone call and it gets you an emotional response, be very, very careful. Most of the time they're pushing for greed, curiosity. Urgency will always be in there. I have yet to see a phishing email or text message that says, hey, whenever you got some time and feel like it, do whatever it is I'm asking you to do. It just doesn't work that way. There's always something, some deadline looming, something going on that's like, I need you to do this now. I'm about to board a plane, or I'm in a meeting, or whatever, that drives people into doing this. Fear, obviously, a big one. You're afraid you're going to get arrested, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are what they use. They use the emotional manipulation to get people to stop applying common sense and critical thinking to what's going on. And frankly, it's really, really effective. That's kind of, social engineering has been effective for years. This is no change in that. So let's look a little bit at the tax theme attack types. And what I did here is I actually went through and I pulled emails, and we gathered some emails that we've seen um, throughout the years, between last year and this year, typically. And I wanted to show you the sorts of things that we have here, and hopefully point out some of the stuff where you can spot them. I find that a lot of people go, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that was a thing." So that's why I wanted to do this. Again, these are real emails that have been reported to us. This first one here, using the IRS, right? What's scarier than getting a call or an email or an invoice from the IRS? Now, folks, I have never heard of the IRS actually sending invoices. However, I have my years of experience of dealing with the IRS through, yearly filings, to know that younger people, people that have immigrated recently, that are from other countries, they may not be aware of this. So here you go. You have you have the IRS supposedly sending you an invoice. Nobody wants to do that. You're like, oh, what's going on? They even call out the or sign it with the Deputy Commissioner for Services Enforcement. That's the fear technique. Now, if you look at who it came from, first of all, the subject is a scary one: IRS invoice. Number two, supposed to come from IRS Gov. The reply to address, though, is drop send. And if you look at the link, of course, it goes to myaccount.dropsend.com, so on and so forth, right? And a lot of times what they'll do is they're sending you an infected document. When you do this, you view the document. Sometimes they'll throw in little things like why you need to enable the macro, et cetera, et cetera. But this is to get you to click on that. And it's using fear of the IRS to do it. Now, they also have a short time frame. Remember, urgency is a factor here. So you can download these 3 times over the next 3 days. That puts a finite deadline on when you need to do it, right? But again, fairly easy to spot if you look at it and it's from DropSend, not the IRS, and you know that this is just not something that they typically do. This is the things that you can spot on there real quick as well. Wanted to highlight those just because it's always nice to be able to do this if you want to use this for an example for someone else. Again, those are the key kind of red flags on this one. Now, the next one is an IRS refund, right? So now we're going the other way. Instead of expecting the IRS to take your money, now they're going to give it back to you. So this is a whole different kind of feel, like, yay, I get money. Now, I think it's interesting, after an audit of your prior year taxes, which you probably didn't know we were doing, we'll just insert that in there, we identified an error in the calculation of your taxes. Now, that is a typo put in from the platform, so it wouldn't be in the real email, but you can kind of see that. You overpaid and are due a refund of $197. Wow. Who doesn't want $197 back, right? They give a reference number, kind of official looking here. Now what they're going to want you to do is they're going to want you to go into this website, which is https:/refund.net/claim. However, if you hover over this, that's not really what it is. Okay. But the idea here is the fear of the final notice, right? You look at this right here. The audits do scare people, but in this case, obviously you're getting it back. I will tell you that the IRS is not going to audit you and tell you afterwards without you being aware of it in the first place. Sorry, that subject just kind of threw me on that one. Now, the refund processing center piece is obviously something to make it look official. Refund at cloudservicecare.com, though, is again not the IRS. So this is something that you want to try to teach people to look out for. Now, this is another little trick they use, trying to gather your information. W-2 verification, right? This is an urgency to, complete a form. This, obviously, the graphics are on there when you have it up there. This one relates to an HSA, a healthcare savings account, which a lot of people have moved for, so it may relate to you. This is obviously driving towards compliance to the IRS and the government. This assign you a task is kind of interesting, and the fact that it comes from a SharePoint online account is interesting because a reply to won't necessarily work for that. So what they'll do a lot of times here is they're going to send you to somewhere, and it is going to it's going to get you to give up information that should be tax related, maybe your social security number, things like that, in order to quote unquote verify this W 2. Obviously, we know that's not real, but that is one of the tricks that they use. Another kind of angle that they put on it here is something like this from a well known vendor like ADP. Now, obviously, they have cut the edges off of this graphic. They didn't do a real good job of putting that in there. And, it's coming from ADP, which happens to be a hotmail.com email address. Probably not legit, right? Some of the things you can see there. You expect to see W 2 information. This is a well known vendor that a lot of people use. It is simple and to the point. Instead of trying to go with a long, drawn out tale or something like that, very simple. People are looking for their W 2 information right now so that they can file their taxes, they can do that sort of thing. Unfortunately, it's going to take you to places, maybe a login for ADP. And that's what's interesting here is they'll use the same template for different types of attacks. Some of them may be, okay, confirm your information to see it. Some of them may be your login to ADP, which gets you into all of your stuff, your tax forms, paycheck stubs, all that kind of stuff. This is another way to do that, and they'll reuse these templates in order to try to drive different activities. So the next one here is the old IRS court order. Again, very scary sort of thing. As you can see in here, we did blank out the names, but IRS was not from the IRS.gov. I've never heard of the IRS sending a court order via email, right? Imagine that. But again, it's very, very scary when the IRS is reaching out to you, and that's what they rely on. I love the fact that it says it's from a trusted source, right? That's a nice little trick to make you feel better. Oh my gosh, it's a trusted source. It's real. Gives the name. You received a secure document. A lot of official looking stuff going on here, including the disclaimer and the ID down below. So these sorts of things, again, are using that authority of the IRS and the government to get you to do tax related things. These are some of the things you're looking for here. We're going to see them over and over again. If you click on that court order, it's either going to be an infected document, or they're going to try to get you to put in sensitive information to quote unquote confirm who you are. And that's where things really, really kind of go wrong for you. Now, the next one here, these are some of my favorites. This is actually from my phone. Okay, over the course of a couple of days, constantly getting these calls, and they always end up these activities related to your social security number. We've been forced to suspend your social security number, yada yada yada. Right? It's the same message over and over again each time. Now, a lot of these will come in from 800 numbers. Sometimes they'll come in from a home area code. So, for example, while I live in Florida, I'm one of these people that has their cell phone number from, eons back. It's an Arizona area code. So if I get a phone call from an Arizona area code these days, I can pretty much tell you, especially if they're not on my contacts list, this is a scammer. And so what they do is they try to make it look familiar to you, and make it look like it fits in as a local number. For me, it's a flag, but you'll see these from 800 numbers. You'll see these from those numbers. The trick is they're going to have you press a number here. They say, oh, it's been suspended. If you want to talk to someone about this, press a number. So it will actually take you to a person. And I followed down the rabbit trails on this at times before. One of the times I actually chatted with a person for a moment. Once I asked them if, now that it's suspended, if I can quit paying into Social Security number, that's when they finally hung up on me. But you will see over and over again that these people are there and ready to take these calls. They're very well scripted. They know what's going on. They want to get information that you can verify this, that, the other thing. They're there to steal your information, and get you to give up a lot of very sensitive things over the phone. I'm telling you, when you're a younger person, you're not used to this, you're not aware of these scams, it ends up being a very scary thing when you get a call like this. I've got 3 teenage kids, and if they get a call like this, I know If they didn't know or their friends didn't know, they'd be really worried about it and they want to handle it right now. That's the kind of pressure that gets them to do that. Now, within organizations, what are the common targets? Well, generally, anyone with an email address can be a target. Hackers can go after specific people they consider high value, executives. Don't forget executive assistants. A lot of times, these people have the ability to read emails, send on their behalf, deal with stuff like that. Executive assistants actually get targeted fairly often, yet they are the ones that people forget to give the same kind of training that they give to the executives. Okay. HR professionals, always a big target because they control sensitive information, and payroll or finance, right? That's where the money is. Um, they typically want to target people with some authority and access to information and money. That's the key things that they're after. Either the authority to get the information or access to the information and money. So they'll hit up they'll pretend to be a CEO, or they'll get into a CEO's email account. They'll send something over to payroll and say, I need all of the W-2s for all of the employees. I need them ASAP. Or they'll spoof the executive and do the same sort of thing. All that W-2 information goes out the door in an email because they thought they were sending it to the boss. It's a very powerful thing that happens there. So, defending against these attacks. Well, it's a layered approach. There is no silver bullet, especially when it comes to these social engineering ones, right? Whether it's email, whether it's text messages, whether it's phone calls, it doesn't really matter. There's no silver bullet. So the important thing is to build layers of defense, right? You want to reduce your risk as much as possible through the layers. Number one, most effective thing to do is training and awareness. It's often underestimated and sometimes misunderstood, but I'll tell you what, it is very, very effective. Letting people know when they see this, they go, oh, I've heard of that one. That is huge when it comes to this. Next thing is email and spam gateways. Try to stop as much as you can from getting to the user's inbox, right? Data loss prevention. If somebody is suckered into sending out W-2 forms, you want DLP catching it and going, hold on a second. Why are you sending, social security numbers outside of the organization via email? That's where the DLP really, really comes into play to help with that piece there. Multi-factor authentication to protect those accounts, especially with the executives. They click on a link, they go somewhere, they think they're signing into ADP, and without multi-factor authentication, they may give up their password, and then the bad guys can just use the password. Where with MFA, obviously, they have to then have another factor to be able to log into the account. So it can do a lot to prevent the problem. It's not infallible, but man, I highly recommend MFA anywhere you can put it. And then monitor and alert against brute force attacks against the accounts or access to sensitive data. Far too often I see where accounts are not monitored for attempted logins, right? So RDP sessions are pretty bad about this sometimes when organizations have internet facing remote desktop protocol or something like that. The bad guys can just keep throwing stuff at it, and it never really alerts anyone to the problem happening. So these layers make a huge difference. Now, again, training and awareness, that's where we come in. That's what I focus on a lot, because the human side is something that we really don't do a lot with, and we ignore far too often. So when it comes to training people, we want to focus on changing the behavior, not just teaching a single lesson. Now, that's more of a strategic view than a tactical one, but your end game should be changing the behavior, not just one thing. Now, we got 4 steps that we found work. All right. We've got, gosh, I think we're upwards of 30,000 customers now. So this is what we found work across a pretty broad group of people. First of all, do a baseline. And I say this because it's always good to know where you're starting from. Far too often people start a program, they don't baseline what's going on, and they only start recording results after it's started. That can be a little bit deceiving. So what I recommend you do is get a baseline. Now, we can help you with that. It's free, no big deal. We can do a simulated phishing attack on your employees and figure out where you are right now. What I find with this step is, sadly, a lot of people are very shocked at what they end up finding out when they do this test. But anyways, you get the baseline going. Then what you do is you train people. And it's important that you train them first and then you do the phishing afterwards. Okay. You want to show people how to protect themselves. Then you do simulated phishing to kind of reinforce what you taught them, and to keep them looking in the email for, the red flags that basically show that it's a phishing email. You measure the results of that, and then what you do is you kind of keep going back and forth. When you fish your users after you've watched the results, when you get down in the, say, the single digit percent click rates, now you make the phishing emails a little bit tougher, and you let them know you're doing that so that they're not surprised, but say, hey, you guys are doing such a great job, we're going to make them tougher. And boom. So you continue to do that until they are really, really good at spotting even the really, really tough ones. Likewise, training has to happen more than once a year. It just does. We found that doing a larger training once a year is awesome, and then you also do quarterly or monthly short trainings to keep their mind in the right place. And the training doesn't have to be like what you're thinking. All right. That's something that is misconfigured a lot of times, or misconstrued. We actually have a series here that we designed strictly for that. It's got 12 different episodes. They're like 5 to 8 minutes a piece. It actually tells a story, which is a lot of fun, as opposed to, you know, click here, listen to this, answer this question, move on. It actually tells a story that gives examples of good security behavior and why it matters, instead of just beating people over the head with training. We actually find that people come back and they're like, hey, when are you going to release the next episode? And so a lot of times companies or organizations will extend that out throughout the year. It keeps people thinking about these things as they keep seeing it, right? You want to keep it fresh in their heads. Now, when you're training them, we don't want them to be technical unless you're in a technical role. Accounting, marketing doesn't need to be technical. Look for red flags. This is what we focus on. Things like, did I get an email 2 o'clock in the morning from, the HR department on a Saturday? Is that unusual? Maybe I ought to pay attention, right? This is fantastic. And we can get you a copy of this too. There's a PDF out there for this that we found that people really like to have in their cubes. Now, does it work? Yes, absolutely. This is millions upon millions of users. This is 9 million users in like 18,000 organizations. Okay. Initial click rate, remember I said you might be surprised, 30%. The same users 3 months later, after doing some training and one or two of the simulated phishing ones, down to 15. At the end of the year, that same 9 million people were down to 2% click rate. So it is remarkably effective getting at least that the most important layer, which is quite frankly keeping the person from clicking on things, in line with where you need it to be, and reducing that risk significantly for pretty low cost. So that being said, I know we're pretty much low on time at this point. David, do we have any questions?
We sure do, Eric. Yeah, great presentation. Really, really relevant content. I mean, in fact, my wife asked me recently about that social security number, being suspended because she got the same message. These things are happening every day to most everyone out there. So great advice. Let's see. First question that came in here, they're asking, how are cyber criminals so successful in getting users to open links and attachments?
They've been doing it for a while, and the scripts that they follow, the emotional tags and tugs that they use, again, that's really what it boils down to, is getting people's emotions riled up. If you've ever tried to make a decision when you're highly emotional, you realize that critical thinking goes out the window. This is exactly what they hope for, and it's oftentimes through fear. Sometimes it's through, oh my gosh, you won the lottery, things like that. Those can all be a key part of this, but it's usually through the emotions. It's usually through that kind of manipulation, and they've got it down so well. It's really quite amazing.
Yeah, it sure is. I mean, I saw a news article just a couple days ago where young people are getting text messages that say that they've been drafted into the army, and to contact and provide, of course, your personal information to get the process started. So it's crazy the things they come up with, but they really get people emotional and interested in to take some kind of action.
Interestingly enough, there's a new show on Netflix. I want to say it's Jakarta is the name of it. I believe it's an Indian language with a dub, but it's about a village or a small town. I haven't had a chance to see it yet. It just came out like a week ago. But it's about a small town that they start doing these phishing scams and how it kind of spreads, and it's all about it's based on true events and how this kind of grew into an economy in this area. I'm really looking forward to seeing it. And again, it's a new Netflix one.
Wow. Okay. I'm going to have to check that out. I'm going to make a note and watch that later. So, another question here they're asking, who exactly needs to be trained? Is it just the executives that need to be educated on these scams, or, does everyone at the organization need some form of training?
So everybody really needs it. And this is what it boils down to is the attackers love it when they get an executive or they get somebody with some authority like that. It is absolutely fantastic for them. But if they can't, they're perfectly happy getting a regular Joe and then using their account to be able to basically further the attacks. Now, maybe they're going to take somebody that's trusted in the organization and email the CEO or start with a manager and send them infected things. We see them pivot a lot of times through that. Now, what I do think needs to happen is different roles need some slightly different training. Everyone needs the same basics, but your typical floor level person that may have an email account, let's say in an assembly operation, is probably not going to see the same kind of attacks that an executive is, or a payroll person or an HR person is. Right? Nobody's going to ask them to change their bank account number that their direct deposit goes to, which is another one of the scams they use a lot. So the people that are going to be exposed to certain types of attacks due to their job role need some specific stuff on that. But everybody needs to have, if you have an email address or you have access to any information, everybody in the organization needs to have some training.
Okay. Okay. Great advice. Yeah. Another question here, and that is, when dealing with sensitive information, how do you recommend sharing data? What's the best practice for that?
No, that's a great point. There are times when an organization may need to share like the organization's W-2 forms with their tax people, right? Legitimately do that. It should never be by email. Let's just put that out there right now. Never, ever, ever, ever should it be by email. What I recommend people do is if it's going to be something like that, set up something before the request time. When you're on another call with the tax people or whatever, set up a method to do this. It may be some sort of a secure FTP site where you can drop the stuff and then they move it out immediately. It may be something along those lines. One recommendation I do have is when you transfer this kind of sensitive information to an organization like that, to an internet facing portal, no matter what it is, whether it's Dropbox with a login or whatever, once that information is up there, the other side needs to take that information out of that folder and move it somewhere else locally that's not internet exposed. That's a step that I see a lot of people miss. Is it gets transferred up there and then it all just sits in that spot that is that's facing the internet. So having a process like that prior to that email that says, hey, I need you to send all the W-2s right now, is a key to doing this.
Okay. Yeah, great advice. I like that. And then another question here. I mean, there's a lot of fans out there saying how they use Know Before, how much it's helped them. I mean, for those who aren't familiar with Know Before, what do you recommend? How do they get started?
Yeah, I mean, our website, knowbefore.com, or you can reach out to me at any of the information here. We make it very, very easy. It's something that people underestimate. And I did the same thing when I came on board, actually, where I had come from. I was building our own awareness platform. I made some assumptions on what the costs were. And frankly, I got here, I looked at the costs, I called my old boss. I'm like, stop what you're doing and check this out. They ended up buying it pretty much immediately. It's something that deploys very, very quickly, very easily. I think we spend about an hour or so on average getting organizations set up with training and simulated phishing. So it happens very easily. It's all available again through the website, or if you want to reach out to me, if you got any questions, any of my email address there, follow me on Twitter. I'm most active on the at Eric or at Eric Crone one. However you want to do that is fine. We're very easy to get started with.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the event today. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well. Thanks so much, Eric.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
For more information on Know Before, of course, visit knowbefore.com. Also, check out the handout that's available there for download in your audience console. All right, great presentation there with Eric. I'm just going to bring up a poll question for everyone out there in the audience, and that is, what additional information would you like about the KnowBe4 solution? Eric is still available to handle questions electronically, so get your questions in, and Eric will do his best to answer as many of those as he can on today's event. We got a lot of good feedback, of course, people who are using KnowBe4, how it's helped them, questions about the Netflix show that Eric mentioned. So we'll be covering all those. I do want to encourage you to also check out the handout that's available for download. This is a really cool, nice-looking poster called Social Engineering Red Flags. There's 22 social engineering red flags to look for. This is a poster you could, print out, put it in the break room, share it, via email with your employees. Try to prevent these sort of business compromise attacks, email compromise attacks that Eric was talking about in his presentation. So I'll give you just another minute to answer that poll question. We appreciate those responses. All right, thank you everyone who responded to that poll. And it's now time for our next presenter on today's EcoCast. I'm excited to introduce Mr. Martin Crew, Director of Product Marketing at Gigamon. Martin, are you there?
Yes, good morning, everybody. How are you doing?
Good morning, Martin. Thank you for being on. Take it away.
Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction. All right, excellent. So thanks very much, and sorry about the little glitch there. So my name is Martin Crew. I'm from Gigamon, and my specific responsibility is that I'm in charge of our solutions marketing program. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak to everybody wherever you are in the country or the world. I've got about 20 minutes that I'm going to work through content, and then 5 minutes for questions at the end. And then, as was mentioned with the last speaker, I'll stay around for a while after the end of the webinar. So if anybody has got additional questions they want to send through to us electronically, I will either do my best to answer them live, or I'll get back to you before the end of the day. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to do our standard product pitch. I thought I would answer the specific questions around modernizing and securing financial services technologies. And what I would do is go through a pretty sort of short agenda and talk about what we're seeing from our customers. I think it's one of the interesting things with webinars is the opportunity to get information about what your peers are doing, what they're seeing, and what they're trying to respond to. So I thought that's where I'd sort of focus my efforts today. Before I do that, I'm going to give you a very brief bit of background about Gigamon. Given we're speaking to primarily a financial services audience, I expect that a large number of people are already familiar with Gigamon, but for those of you who aren't, just let me give you a one-page introduction to who we are and what we do. So Gigamon's been around for a few years, and the problem that we are focused on is working at the enterprise level with giving people the visibility that they need into their business. So providing network-level visibility that enables them to optimize their organization, optimize their tools, and through that achieve the very specific thing that we're talking about today, which is the modernization and the securing of their environments. So, snapshot of the organization. We have going on now 4,000 customers worldwide. We've focused immensely on the satisfaction of those customers. So we've got a very large support organization that works 24/7 globally and has achieved a 4.8 out of 5 satisfaction rating with our customers. And our technology and the technology that the support team are working with is based on 75 global patents. So we've got very, very deep technology. It's also very broad technology that we're deploying on behalf of our customers. Customers are typically large organizations. We're focused on Global 5,000 and so the next tier down, so essentially sort of top 10,000 companies globally. And we've got very good acceptance within those organizations. So as you can see from this slide, 83 of the Fortune 100 use us. And on the financial services side, we have 7 of the top 10 global banks using us. So that's organizations like Bank of America, Citigroup, and various sort of regional banks, Royal Bank of Canada, Royal Bank of Scotland, etc. We're also heavily used by various institutions. So Fannie Mae, the Fed Reserve, NASDAQ, and the New York Merc all use the product. Okay, so let us start to sort of move from talking about Gigamon to talking about some of the things that we're seeing with our customers. So the topic is obviously about security and modernization. So in our mind, there is no security within the organization without modernization. It's simply not going to happen. And why is that? It's not going to happen just because things are moving too fast. Why, we ask ourselves, are they moving too fast? And it's essentially because of the digital transformation that we've all been going through. One of the big things that we talk about and that we see with our customers is the need for modernizing their entire infrastructure. So most organizations these days are responding to a number of major pressures that we're going to talk about in a minute. But the pressures that people are under are driving adoption of new technologies at a rate that we've rarely seen in the industry before. So what technology trends are we seeing? So first off, we're seeing massive disruption of traditional IT. I think those of you who've been around the industry for a few years, if you look back to where you were 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, even 2 years ago, the landscape of applications of technology within the organization is probably unrecognizable to what it is today. So what's causing this disruption? Well, we really see three things. First is new and also revitalized traditional competition. One of the big things that technology has done is it's essentially dropped the bar for new entrants coming into the market. So the availability of new technologies, the availability of significant capital to build companies and enable them to enter the markets has led to a massive increase in competition in most sectors that we've seen. And obviously, it's not just new entrants to the market. There's a lot of very strong companies still in the financial services market, and many of those have co-opted a lot of this new technology either through acquisition or by building things organically. And so you have this mix of both new generation competition and existing competition. Second thing that's changed in the landscape is obviously regulation. So although many of us may have anticipated this for several years, I don't think any of us have actually experienced it in our working lives in the way that it is now. So we work in obviously highly regulated industry here, and complying with those regulations is a continuous challenge. And then a final thing is obviously security concerns. 20 years ago, if you discussed security with a bank or with an insurance company, the discussion would be totally different to the discussion that it would be today. The idea of data breaches on the scale that we've seen, credit card fraud, all those other issues, were just not issues years ago in the way that they are today. So these are three of the major drivers that we see leading to this disruption within the financial services industry. That obviously impacts technology. So what are the technology trends that we're seeing? So there are three major things that I think we're seeing right now with our large-scale customers, and that we are actively involved in finding solutions with those customers too. So the first is many organizations in the financial services sector and across all industry sectors, as they've grown to large scale, they've typically done it by building siloed applications. So there was a specific application for every stage of the mortgage process, for example, or every stage of the commercial lending process. And it was very, very hard to share information across those silos. Obviously, it was something people had to do, so there was massive investment in software that enabled them to do that. But the big thing that's different nowadays is that these operations, these business processes, are no longer just internal to the bank or to the financial services company. They're all exposed to customers through mobile applications, through telephone service, through whatever. So the whole area of customer experience has really changed the way that financial services companies need to think about access to this information. So one of the critical things that we're seeing is what I'm calling rather inelegantly the de-siloing of core operations to support that level of customer experience. Second thing we're seeing is obviously the issue of scale. You know, everyone's always talked about data visibility, the need to have that. So when you were operating in a mainframe environment or a homogeneous client-server environment, or even you were able to tell your customers, hey, the only way we're doing business is if you're using a specific browser or web environment, those days are long gone. The issue is now no longer just providing visibility within a single environment. It's providing visibility across hybrid infrastructures. So multiple on-premise systems are obviously still there. You know, the data center is not gone away despite anything that people are saying. So there's the internal applications where you need to have visibility. There's applications that have been moved to virtualized infrastructures in order to save cost or to scale. And finally, cloud, because obviously the way that most applications are being deployed these days is a DevOps model in the cloud. So you've got to figure out ways to provide visibility across all of those different infrastructures, all of the different application architectures that they support, and all of the individual applications. And now you have to do it at global scale. I mean, one of the big things we've seen within financial services is the consolidation of regional banks, regional operations under large global brands. And the expectation of consumers is that if they bank with one of these large-scale organizations or they insure through one of these organizations, that wherever they are, they're going to have full access to all their information, regardless of where it's actually sitting. So the second challenge that I'm highlighting here is that the data visibility issue has become both huge in scale and more complex in terms of the infrastructures you've got to have that visibility to. And then finally, and very importantly, is this issue of how do you implement consistent and effective security policies and tools across that type of environment. Again, multiple deployment environments at massive scale, bringing in more documents, more information than ever before, providing it to more users than ever before in different formats. The issue around developing effective policies to manage that is one issue, and then the ability of how do you actually put the tools in place to cater for that is another. So, three major trends that we're seeing and that we're spending a good amount of time sitting with our clients discussing. Second thing that we're seeing in terms of major trends is actually sort of a good news thing. So the old days, and you know, for many of you on the phone, I'm sure these are before your time, of there being an adversarial relationship between business groups and information technology groups, those days are long gone. So one of the big things that we've seen this transformation process within financial services bring is the better alignment of business and IT around really the need to drive agility and innovation within the organization. You know, with these new entrants coming into the market, with the need to respond to regulatory pressures, with the need to provide effective security, there's just no way to do it unless everybody is on the same page. So we're seeing that really in two major aspects. So the first is that as new applications are increasingly deployed using agile DevOps methodologies and on the cloud as a scalable, consistent platform, that's one of the key things where we've seen business and IT working extremely closely together. The second big thing that we've seen is that security, which used to be an afterthought, is now becoming a first thought within most of these organizations. So the days of groups developing applications, then being sort of brought into staging side, and then people thinking about, well, what are the security implications of this, and handing it over to a different team to resolve, those are long gone. So we're seeing security now being brought in at the earliest days of new applications being conceived and being very tightly involved through the entire process. So those are two very positive trends that we're seeing, and both go to this critical issue of modernizing and securing the environments. Really, without those two things, it's very difficult to achieve that goal. Okay, so that's a little bit about what we're seeing. What I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about Gigamon and how we address those issues. So this is critical to what we do. So we have a fundamental belief that at the core of effective operations within any industry is the need for that industry to have real-time access to all the data that's flowing across their network. So of course everybody has their systems of records, but these days there's a huge amount of data at any point in time that's actually live in transit on the network. And with much of this is where you actually need to interact with the data. So for example, with security, thinking about that. Security obviously has kind of after the event aspects to it in terms of the forensic work that when something's gone wrong, figuring it out and taking the steps to prevent it happening again. But the right time to be addressing this is to be prepared for these issues and then have visibility of security issues while they're developing. So be able to see the early telltale signs that there might be a denial of service attack coming and be able to react in real time to secure the enterprise against that. So this notion of visibility is absolutely critical, we believe, to the success of organizations, of teams within those organizations, and it's fundamental to what we do. So when we built the Gigamon platform, which we call the Visibility and Analytics Fabric, we didn't add this visibility as an afterthought. This was something that we architected the platform for from day one. So what does that mean? So it means if you look at the various devices and the applications that you have on your global network, you've got a myriad of different data sources, applications, etc. So you've got the apps you've most recently deployed, the digital apps, which may be containerized, maybe microservices. You've got all the mobile apps that you've deployed across many, many different devices. You've got often operational technology. So most organizations these days are using some form of IoT devices, sensors that are generating huge amounts of data, and many of those have non-traditional security models. So, a lot of these devices just don't easily fit into the existing agent-based security models, for example, that many organizations have. And then finally, you've got legacy apps. Legacy is not going away, and I don't think anybody in financial services would really think it was. Most organizations are reliant on systems of record in particular, that go back, several generations in computing terms. So you have many, many different devices, applications, and generations of devices and applications that are generating data. You then have, on the far right side of this screen, many, many different tools that you use to monitor what's going on with those applications, to ensure the performance of those, so that you're able to meet customer expectations, service levels, etc. And then you have all the various security tools that you've deployed in your stack. Typically, what happens is that, or what's happened in the past, is there's a one-to-one relationship between all of the applications that are being deployed and the tools and things that are being used to measure and monitor what's going on there. Our view is obviously that that's extremely inefficient. When any one of those things changes, it creates major, major problems. So in our view, the way to address this is to have something in the middle of all of this. And that is what the Visibility and Analytics Fabric is architected to do. So we basically sit on the network between everything that's generating data and everything that's consuming data. We bring that data into our platform using a variety of different access tools. So in a sort of conventional environment, these are the taps type tools that let you tap into the individual environments, get the data that you need. We also have virtualized taps, so that if people are working in a cloud environment, exactly the same technology applies. So it does not matter where these applications are deployed or where the devices are sending information through. We can capture all of the information on your global network. Second thing that we do is we obviously aggregate that to give you a single shot of what's going on. We then transform it, so we have tools that will do things like deduplication. As everyone on this call is aware, one of the big impacts on operational efficiency is the fact that you have so many copies of data, often contradictory, on a network. So which of those are the ones that you need to keep, which give you the single source of truth? So we have the ability to identify duplicates and get rid of duplicates. Second thing is we have the ability to look at what is the relevant data that applications and tools need to consume. So we have many, many different forms of application filtering. We also have different ways to figure out what traffic people need to look at. So do specific tools, for example, need to look at an entire streaming flow of data? Or is it enough that they sample either the header or they sample throughout that stream to make sure that the data is what it says it is and that it's going to the tools that can ingest it and do something with it? So that's kind of the things within the core operating system. Then above that, we have our package solutions. We have SecureView that provides the security that you need, NetView, which is for net-based NetOps, and MobileView, which is designed for large-scale service providers. And wrapping around all of that, we have our cloud suite, which ensures that whatever we're doing at the local level in terms of on-premises, we can replicate to the cloud. So I'm going to skip quickly through these next few slides, but I just want to talk about those individual modules a little bit. So NetView is the tool most commonly used by all of our customers, and it's there to ensure that performance on the network and uptime is optimized so that business continuity is guaranteed and the ability to respond agilely to the changes that you're seeing is there. So as I said, this looks at the runtime that's available. It also looks at cloud adoption. So one of the critical things we see with customers migrating to the cloud is the fear of losing visibility either when they're in the cloud or as they move to the cloud. So with Gigabon, we provide visibility through that entire process. And just as we provide visibility through that process, we provide security through the process. So Gigabon's SecureView suite identifies and prevents internal and external threats. So many, many security tools are focused towards external threats and guarding what comes onto the network. One of the big things that we do, as well as guarding that, is ensure that we have the east-west visibility on the network. Because obviously many security threats, as we now know, originate internally. And they can be guarded against, but to guard against them, you have to have that full visibility onto the east-west traffic. So we provide that, and we look to eliminate blind spots in other sensors as well. So for example, with encrypted traffic and with TLS 1.3 being rolled out, this is obviously a major issue right now. So organizations have moved from a tiny proportion of their traffic being encrypted to where many organizations are now saying we need to encrypt everything. And of course, at one level, that's achievable, but at a practical level, it comes with a huge overhead. So one of the things that we've done is developed a centralized decryption engine that looks at how you can actually do this in a practical sense. What information needs to be, well, all information needs to be decrypted, but once it's decrypted, how does that information need to be shared across applications, across tools? And that's one of the critical things that our decryption engine does. It doesn't just decrypt, it figures out intelligently what applications can and need to consume that data and routes it in that way. So the ability to stay secure in whatever environment you're in and as you move between environments is one of the critical things that we do. The final thing I want to highlight in terms of our product capability is what we call Gigabon Threat Insight. So this is a real-time tool that provides a complete view of what's going on the network and then focuses on how you guard against emerging threats. So this was a tool that was built by a security team. It wasn't built by a bunch of software guys hypothesizing about what might happen. This was built by an organization who were providing threat detection and response to many large-scale organizations. It provides deep situational insights. So we gain not just visibility, but we gain a lot of context by looking at what's happening on the Gigamon managed network so that we can predict what's going to happen. And then we back up what the computer can do with our own ATR team. So these guys take the information and they actually manipulate it. So they look through, they figure out what's likely to be false positive, what actually needs their time to drill down on. And then where they drill down, they have extensive best practices that enable them to prioritize the response and drill down to provide the root cause analysis that organizations look for when they've had a security issue. So the net of all of this is that we provide the visibility that provides quantifiable business outcomes to our customer organizations. This is not just another tool that's going to sit there and do one specific task. This is a product that actually provides the visibility into the core data, routes it to the tools that actually need to see it, and in doing so, helps optimize the performance of those tools. So one of the typical entry points between ourselves and a customer is they're saying, hey, I've got all these tools. They may be daisy-chained, they may be in parallel architectures, it really doesn't matter, but they've got all these tools, and the tools are just not operating efficiently. They're not doing what they expected the tools to be able to do. They're taking a huge amount of human intervention. When there are issues, it's almost impossible to troubleshoot and track down where they are. So what we do is we optimize the performance of those tools, we optimize the performance of your NetOps and InfoSec teams, and in doing that, we actually significantly add to the business continuity of our client organizations and their ability to respond agilely to either opportunities or threats that they see. One of the reports that we have available, and if anyone's interested, we can provide it afterwards, after this session, is we worked with a company called ESG last year to understand the economic impact of Gigamon on some of our customers. And I'm just going to highlight a few of the things that we saw. So one of the big things we saw, for anyone who's operating an InfoSec team, you'll appreciate this, I'm sure, is a 70% reduction in false positives. So with an average size InfoSec team, if you can reduce false positives by 70%, you're effectively adding a number of sort of new people back into the team and enabling those people to do higher impact work than just chasing down these issues. We reduce the amount of network downtime, not because we've got magic dust that we sprinkle on the network, but because we can see issues emerging. We can see where planned maintenance is required, how we route traffic around tools using inline bypass so that it doesn't impact this. So those are a couple of specific examples on the network security and performance side, but we deliver benefits really to all the tools that you have on the network. All with a view towards modernizing and securing the environment that our customers are operating in. Okay, so those really were the slides that I wanted to go through. What I'll do now is open the floor up and ask for any questions that we've received.
Yes, absolutely, Martin. Yeah, great presentation. While we do some Q&A, I'm just going to bring up this poll question for the audience. The question says, what additional information would you like about the Gigamon solution? And we'll just leave that up while we do some Q&A. So let's see, first question that came in here, they're asking about 2020. They say they already use Gigamon, and what can they expect to see in 2020?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So thank you for whoever asked that. So the big things that we have on our product roadmap for 2020 are big emphasis on the cloud. Obviously, we see increasing number of customers migrating to the cloud, migrating to complex hybrid environments. So ensuring that we have exactly the same functionality running across all those environments is critical. Second big thing we're seeing on the security side is the adoption of TLS 1.3. So ensuring that we've got full support for that is very important to us, and that is now in place. So for anybody considering, and obviously everybody is considering 1.3, Gigamon provides full support for that. And then the other thing that we're looking at is providing more tools that use what we call our application intelligence technologies. So at the core of Gigamon, there is an engine that lets you look at all the data that's in transit on the network and to analyze it in multiple different ways. So the first area of application we've used for this tool and the underlying data store has been the Threat Insight product that I mentioned a moment ago. Threat Insight is going through an upgrade right now, and there's going to be a new version of that available probably at the end of the first quarter. And if anyone's coming along to the RSA show, I'd welcome you to come by the booth and take a sneak preview of that. So there'll be new functionality coming into Threat Insight. And then through the course of the year, we're going to be putting more tools into the Insight family that automate a lot of the analysis that folks have to do by hand. Again, one of the core issues we see with customers is they just don't have enough people available on both the NetOps side and the InfoSec side. So for us, there's a big emphasis in 2020 and beyond in automating processes that previously people have done, but that we can, through rules engines and artificial intelligence, sort of figure out, automate, and build into this intelligence suite. So that's one of the big things that we'll be doing. And again, if you are coming to RSA, please come along, see us, and get a sneak preview of some of the things we're doing there.
Okay, very nice. Yeah, lots to look forward to this year. Thank you for that update. Another question here. They say they're a small to medium-sized organization. I mean, can you kind of tell us what size of organization uses Gigamon? I know there's a lot of different size, organizations in the financial services vertical.
Yeah. So, honestly, the answer is it's across the board. I mean, we're certainly not selling to, mom and pop organizations, but really there's nobody in the financial services space that's, that fits that profile. So we have many small banks, we have many small trading houses, we have many, I won't say small, but emerging insurance companies who are going very quickly, who are using Gigamon. So one of the critical things is that, as I mentioned with our architecture, we architected visibility in from day one. We're seeing a lot of organizations who are adopting Gigamon who are taking a very similar stance. They understand that they need to have visibility into everything that's happening on the network. So really, for any organization that is data-centric and is particularly real-time data-centric and needs to make sure they're providing the highest availability and performance to their internal and external users, and also the highest level of security to threats, both internal and external, those organizations we're seeing adopting Gigamon. So even relatively small organizations are architecting us into their solutions and seeing very rapid payback. Typically the ROI on a Gigamon investment is something around 7 months, because what we're doing is optimizing the tools and things you've already got in place. So you've already spent tens of millions of dollars in most cases on these tools. What we do is make that investment more efficient.
Okay, very nice. So they don't have to, if they have 10 to 20 network management security tools, you all can help them get more out of those tools.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a survey recently, I think from 451, that said that the average number of tools that organizations have, security tools specifically, was an average of 7, and that for organizations with 10,000 plus people, it was closer to 20. So we see very complex tools architectures with many of our customers. I was working with one last week who had before they moved to Gigamon, they had 23 security and network tools daisy-chained together, and it just made troubleshooting almost impossible within the organization. So we see everything from organizations with a complete greenfield situation where they want to architect a next generation solution, to very complex organizations with many legacy apps, many legacy tools, and they need to bring order to that chaos. And we can help in both of those areas.
Very nice, very nice. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for our live Q&A, but really great presentation, Martin. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
You're so welcome. Thank you, and thank you, everybody, for your attention.
For more information, download the Gigamon ebook there. It's in your handouts tab. It's entitled Driving Digital Transformation with Application Intelligence. Make sure you check that out and read it after the event. All right, we're moving on today in our Financial Services EcoCast. Lots of great content. It's time to introduce our next presenter. I'm now excited to welcome Mr. Kevin Lash, Head of Global Financial Services, Strategy and Solutions at Nutanix. Kevin, are you there?
I am here.
Thank you for being on. Kevin, take it away.
So thanks for that. Thanks for the introduction. So just so folks know where I'm coming from, my name's Kevin Lash. I've been in the industry for quite some time. I started on the institutional side, so Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Fidelity Investments, and then switched over to enterprise technology with Microsoft, Red Hat, and I've been here at Nutanix 2 years. And what Nutanix does is we deliver the infrastructure. You know, we are the infrastructure for private cloud and data center modernization. So that's the focus I'm going to bring today. I really liked our last speaker, and so I want to build on some of the things Martin was talking about and really talk about it from an implementation and practitioner perspective. So let's see if I can get this working. So I'm going to, just to be clear, is we've done a lot of primary research. That research is available to you. We've done everything from working with IDC on this white paper around the business innovation and business drivers for technology transformation. We've looked at it from an enterprise cloud index or cloud consumption model, and we've looked at it from an architecture perspective. And I'll be bringing out some key points from that research, but it's all available to you. Just link into me, and I'll be happy to send that to you as I reference it through the presentation. So just a little bit about Nutanix overall is, we've really exploded. We've been in the infrastructure business, really modernizing cloud infrastructure and data center infrastructure for 10 years. We have over 1,600 financial institutions. They pretty much are spread around the world pretty evenly, as well as across the segments, banking, insurance, and securities, Tier 1 and Tier 2. So, that is, something we're pretty proud about. And I think it really goes to the credibility of what we're seeing around infrastructure and the urgency of implementing modernized infrastructure and securing it along the way. So, ultimately, companies like Nutanix are coming into mind share because the pace of change is compelling financial institutions to realign their IT partnerships. We are the leader in hyperconverged infrastructure, which is really one of the foundational elements of a private cloud or a modernized data center. And that is, immediately we've captured that market leadership. It has grown our customer base very quickly, and I think it's the reason all of us are on the call today. So what are we dealing with? What are our customers dealing with? What are we seeing? So some of the similar things to what Martin was talking about. We sort of look at our customer base on the left side being truly those fintechs. Some of those fintechs run on-prem, but I think most people believe that the fintech community generally runs in a public cloud environment, which creates a certain amount of agility and cost advantage, enabling them to really disrupt our industry, where the financial institutions still very much are looking at a hybrid cloud on-prem solution for obvious reasons. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I really, to the credit of the financial institutions, and this one's ING, and I'll be using customer proof points throughout. So if I mention a customer or I mention a technology or a requirement, we're just assume that we're delivering on that. But ING, it's one of the old, they market themselves as one of the oldest fintechs, and they're platformed on-prem, and so you can clearly see where the financial institutions themselves are rising to the challenge. And then when you see Visa buying Plaid, the long-held prediction that we see consolidation and we would see financial institutions buying fintechs to accelerate their modernization is actually coming to fruition. So we're seeing, Schwab by TD Ameritrade after announcing that they're no longer charging fees on equity trades, which is driving a lot of industry activity. We're seeing BB&T and SunTrust merge, which is now creating Truist, and now we're seeing Visa buying Plaid. So there's just a lot of movement, and a lot of that movement is about getting scale and agility out of a technology platform that actually rises to this challenge of disruption and digital transformation. Even fascinatingly enough, blockchain is even in production, and this one is specifically J.P. Morgan's Interbank Information Network. Over 365 banks are now on this network, exchanging transactions around Treasury services. So this is based on Quorum. It is a blockchain implementation. It is in production. So I don't think we're looking to the future or preparing for the future. I think the future is now, that we are seeing the things that we predicted 2, 3, 4 years ago actually happening, and the dynamics changing, and infrastructure modernization and security front and center in that process. The risk and regulatory implications of this are pretty fascinating. I follow quite a few of the regulatory and discussions that I see out there, and you're everything from OCC fighting with the New York Fed on whether or not fintechs will actually be given banking charters. Will fintechs be able to be banks? That's a huge hurdle for fintechs today. It may even be one of the reasons why Plaid was acquired by Visa. The data locality laws, data privacy laws are driving a lot of focus on on-prem infrastructure and hybrid infrastructure. Operational resilience and with the is a huge regulatory hurdle and discussion. The whole concept of operational resilience, complexity, how to make that work, how to govern that, how does that entertain risk, who has liability for that risk. Very interesting discussions in that area of the business. And lastly, given the Capital One AWS breach last year, we're seeing a lot of regulatory discussion around nominating cloud service providers, or calling cloud service providers, public cloud service providers, the top three in particular, as systematically important financial market utilities. And that would create a whole another set of regulations and oversights. So this risk and regulatory discussion that wraps around infrastructure modernization security is truly important as well for us to all understand the implications of that and what that means for choices we're making around infrastructure modernization. As I mentioned, I just really love this picture. I think you're going to see more and more acquisitions around scale. The reason that I truly believe SunTrust and BB&T are so crucial to understand the reasoning behind that acquisition, creating the 6th largest financial institutions in the U.S., is really this concept of scale around technology and technology innovation. And I just love the way that these executives embraced that challenge, really talked to technology, really one of the first mergers in our industry that was predicated on technology and technology innovation, renaming the company Truist, carrying, so that they're not perceived as carrying legacy forward, moving the headquarters to Charlotte, North Carolina, which I just happen to live in. Really a very, very fascinating acquisition. And if you look at what's sort of driving that relative to technology spend, you can look at technology spend generally as security, IT maintenance, core system modernization, innovation, and compliance. And if you look at Tier 1 institutions being above $100 billion and Tier 2 institutions being below that, where you clearly see today Tier 2 institutions struggling is in the IT maintenance run rate. They're almost twice the run rate of a Tier 1 institution, and Tier 1 institutions are continually becoming more efficient. And that is what has been driving this concept of hyperconverged infrastructure, the concept of getting out of the data center business or going to a managed services data center, of implementing on-prem data centers that are much more efficient, creating less of them, consolidating them. That's what's been driving that whole IT maintenance discussion. But that money is not leaving the organization it is going to innovation. And Tier 2 institutions continue to struggle with innovation relative to Tier 1 institutions because of that run rate disadvantage. So that's something we're working very aggressively to solve. So when I say that, what do I mean? So IT maintenance as sort of a journey around modernization is really about simplicity, choice, cost. That's really the whole concept around hyperconverged infrastructure, solving the 24/7 global operation issue, making legacy data centers more efficient and replatforming them and reducing that expense. And then again, the whole, as Martin mentioned, the whole siloed IT resources, really freeing them up to look at innovation. But when we talk, innovation, what are we talking about? So I think when we talk IT modernization for innovation, now we're talking about things like speed, versatility, resilience, and that really brings this hybrid cloud conversation into discussion, especially for financial institutions. So this is all driven around client expectations, disruption, the concept that the legacy technology infrastructure is really process heavy, slow to respond, takes quite a bit of time to provision. There's increasing regulatory pressure and security threats also, and we need a platform that has sort of defense in depth. And so that's the sort of two generally ways of looking at infrastructure and infrastructure modernization around IT maintenance as one track and innovation as a second track, but really they converge as a single digital transformation architecture. So what are we seeing? We're going to continue to see traditional data centers, again, shrinking in size. That's where, again, we as a hyperconverged infrastructure market leader are really, made our bones. We want to make those traditional data centers much more cost effective. We want to help financial institutions either deliver that in a managed services environment, deliver that on-prem, but really make it super efficient and free up those resources. We're definitely seeing private cloud in financial services. I think most of us probably have read the Bank of America perspective on private cloud and how they saved $2 billion with private cloud, to all the way to the other end with Capital One saying we're going to go all in on public cloud with, in this case, Amazon. But most of us are going to fall in the middle. We're going to look at hybrid cloud as really the model where we're going to have some traditional legacy workloads running in a hyperconverged data center, on-prem managed services. We're going to have a private cloud implementation where we're going to be developing cloud-native applications, and we're going to be focused on data privacy and agility, and security because with the advantages to private cloud. And we're going to use a certain amount of public cloud, and public cloud is certainly accelerating in terms of public cloud adoption, not necessarily a total migration to public cloud. And then eventually we're going to see multi-cloud implementations and applications moving around them. And the number one driver of those decisions truly is security and compliance. The second would be performance. The third would be ease of management. And really the fourth requirement is cost and making that infrastructure come alive. So what's it going to look like? It's going to look something like this, right? It's actually moving in this direction today. You are going to have some legacy data centers. Those are going to be modernized with hyperconverged infrastructure. There's going to be a stepwise migration of those data centers and of those workloads currently running in data centers, and they're going to be moving to a private cloud environment. But that private cloud environment can be on-prem or managed services. It needs to enable it needs to be implemented in such a way that it enables a hybrid cloud environment or hybrid cloud capability from a single management control plane. It needs to be able to engage and interact between public cloud and private cloud and move workloads back and forth and across clouds based on economics, cost economics, as well as security and regulatory and risk. So, it's very interesting to me to see some of the public cloud companies moving towards on-prem, and of course we're delivering certain services as a public cloud capability. So you're seeing, this is really the picture I think we're ultimately going to get to. I think we all should be watching this concept of systematically important financial market utilities, this designation, that 60% of the public cloud workloads today that are being adopted in financial services are running generally in those three 3 large cloud environments, and what is the implications of that relative to systemic risk and oversight. So something we really need to keep our eyes on and understand sort of this dynamic and where these things overlap. The other thing, the very first thing we need to do when we think about cloud and cloud infrastructure modernization and cloud technology is security, right? We in financial services, we truly need to. That is the number one driver. And what do we mean by security when it comes to infrastructure modernization? And I think it's this concept of defense in depth, or if you will, security first design. And that is built-in security into private cloud and modernized infrastructure environments, data center environments, that are not only modernizing for efficiency, but are clearly modernizing for defense in depth. And that's everything from continuous compliance, microsegmentation, network segmentation, all the way through data at rest encryption, data protection, data key management. All of these capabilities need to be in the infrastructure platform that you're modernizing with. And so that you can have this defense in depth construct, and you need, and so I love this slide because it truly helps understand the actual feature function, fit for purpose of security capabilities built into modern infrastructure that truly need to be there, both for private cloud and modernized data centers and a hybrid cloud, and to operate a hybrid cloud. Now, when we move to hybrid cloud and we talk about hybrid cloud, now we've got to talk about okay, that's great. We can secure the on-prem cloud. Certainly gives us more control, and we can select a defense in depth vendor to deliver that infrastructure to us, like Nutanix. But we also need this sort of hybrid cloud governance, and we prefer that from a single control plane if we can get it. And that's everything around visibility, optimization, and control, which really revolves around 2 pieces: the security and compliance piece, which is global security and identity management, some of the things that Martin from Gigamon mentioned, as well as our ability to measure cost so that we don't have a lot of orphaned apps running in the cloud or cloud environments that are not being utilized and just driving cost up. And what we're seeing as we look at our Enterprise Cloud Index survey is, now organizations are starting to rationalize, does that really need to run in the cloud? The fact the cloud is not, public cloud is not necessarily less expensive, and therefore, we can rationalize this. And that's brought rise to this new role of a cloud economist. So you're seeing, public cloud companies ourselves hire people called cloud economists to help rationalize this hybrid cloud model for cost optimization, and then bringing you tools to ensure that you have security and compliance around visibility and control. So that is really key. So once you do that, once you've decided to modernize and you've implemented your on-prem infrastructure strategy, and you're moving to a hybrid cloud environment, this is what you really need to be thinking about in terms of managing this from a single control plane. So when we achieve hybrid cloud, what do we have? We have an infrastructure. We have alignment with business relative to digital transformation, and that allows us to create a digital factory. Now, this whole concept of a digital factory is the concept of continual development of digitized solutions to compete with fintechs or align with fintechs in such a way that the organization can very quickly respond to the customer demands. And so, what does that look like? Well, I really love the Warba Bank example. One of our customers, I picked this example for 2 reasons. One is I think they absolutely have accounted for just about everything that you need to build a digital factory and implement an infrastructure for a digital factory. But they're also, I just love the video and their passion. And my true belief is if an organization like Warba Bank can deliver on the promise of a digital factory with modern infrastructure on-prem, then really just about anybody can do that. And so it doesn't seem so unachievable. So let me play this video for you.
Embracing a DevOps mindset is Warba Bank's philosophy. One that has been put into practice, ensuring better coordination, accountability, and results. We developed our software and automated all possibilities, keeping in mind the cruciality of bringing in efficiencies, control, checks, and accelerated release time. From source code management to continuous integration, we automated it all. The build, testing, configuration management, container security, orchestration, deployment, and continuous monitoring. We now actively track and monitor our mobile banking application with a focus on key customer experience metrics that drive the modern development process. And when it comes to finding operational flaws or shifting through the logs, this outcome leaves no stone unturned. At Warba Bank, we develop to inspire with solutions that bring us together.
So just to kind of move from, okay, well, that's what we need to achieve, and that's an example of what it looks like when we achieve it. Let me just bring a few more concepts forward here around architecture and architecting the enterprise. So first of all, I truly believe, and I think most of us would agree, that IT and business today are coming closer and closer together, that really technology transformation is business strategy today. And we need to move beyond infrastructure, which is really that foundational element, everything from data center modernization around hyperconvergence or end user computing around virtual desktop integration or the remote and branch office environment for those operations. Yes, they do create business outcomes around lower IT costs, higher productivity, and certainly a more secure and compliant infrastructure. But as we move up the business side of this and we start introducing newer cloud-native applications and we start introducing new emerging technologies, IT and business really need to be more symbiotic in the way they work together. And so one of the things that we're doing with this whole concept around digital enterprise is trying to help IT and business come together and find a common language and understand where each fits and do it in such a way that you truly can have the cultural changes and the implementation of DevOps with a cloud-native platforms and a modern architecture built on a cloud platform managed as a hybrid cloud, and truly compete on what is perceived to be a fintech-like environment built in a total with no legacy in a public cloud environment. And I think we've proven that financial institutions can achieve that type of agility and that type of change in hybrid cloud and still maintain the control and security that they need to meet their regulatory and risk obligations. So, we tend to work with institutions. We tend to look at it, and we try to laser in on particular areas of the business that we can help them with initially, and understanding that we're looking towards a larger enterprise architecture, but we want to start with certain building blocks. And so we look at it from an infrastructure perspective, a data services perspective, an application services perspective, and an end-user computing perspective. So we tend to look at these individual use cases in building blocks and understanding that we're knitting together a broader architecture over time that drives that type of agility. And so, people work with us on database engineering, big data analytics, infrastructure, enterprise, line of business application development, dev test environments, lab environments, digital factories, as stepping stones to modernizing their entire cloud, on-prem cloud. We're also working pretty closely with a lot of the GSIs. Now, I'm a true believer that if a global services organization is going to partner with an enterprise technology provider, then we need to be much more prescriptive together in what we're offering our customers and what we're solving for. So one of the things that we're doing with companies like Wipro and HCL and Cognizant and Zensar is really lasering in on a business problem or use case that we can solve together and be much, much more prescriptive in driving a turnkey solution to solve to that particular area of the business. So we are aligning much, much more closely with global systems integrators. We work with them normally, but now we're getting much more prescriptive in the way we work together to the benefit of our financial customers. So in summary, I don't know what the future is going to hold. I know that what we predicted a few years ago seems to be happening, as we talked about. But I do believe that you need to choose your infrastructure partner wisely, and I think you need a new infrastructure partner. And so in J.P. Morgan's case, they're looking, they're investing to compete against Amazon, and so I would strongly recommend that you look at your current infrastructure providers. I look at new infrastructure providers like Nutanix, who are delivering leading edge private cloud and data center modernization with defense in depth and security first design, and really choose wisely, because that future is unknown, and you really do need a partner, go forward partner that may not be that partner that that took you to this to here today. So one of our customers, SocGen, I love the way they put it. I really share this vision with them. Is first of all, we need to support the digital transformation of the organization. Secondarily, to help the IT organization itself become more flexible and be a force for innovation, all in the context where controlling costs remains necessary. And that is going to happen in a private cloud, hybrid cloud environment. And that vision truly is what we're trying to achieve with our customers today. So we have quite a few materials that I can provide to you. I would very much welcome you linking into me. If there's something specifically you would like to deep dive on, I would love to see you consume some of this research that we've invested in. Other than that, I thank you for your time, and I'm open to some questions if there's any.
Yeah, absolutely. Great presentation, Kevin. I really enjoyed that. I'm sure the financial services audience here did as well. So let's see. First question that came in, they're asking, and in fact, I'll bring up the poll question while we do these questions. So the question on the screen is, what additional information would you like about the Nutanix solution? And we'll just leave that up. So I'm sorry, back to the first question. That was, what do you tell financial services companies who are considering moving workloads to the public cloud? What's your advice to them?
Yeah, I'm a big believer that it is a hybrid cloud world. So I am not against public cloud. I just think that when you look at public cloud and you look at that workload, there's really two major levers to that, right? There's a security, data privacy environment concern, or that you've got to be able to stay compliant, and there's a governance issue there. So that's number one: is the workload compliant, and how are you going to monitor that compliance over time? And the second one is cost. I think there's a belief somewhere that running in a public cloud environment is less expensive than running on-prem. I think that's been proven, certainly in the press as of late, to be not true. So I would really look at that, not make that a cost assumption. I would engage a cloud economist. We have cloud economists, public cloud people have, the teams have cloud economists, and really understand how you're measuring that uplift. And then the third thing is, I have no issue, and I don't think anybody should have an issue if the requirement of the workload is best meets the environment it's targeted to. So my issue would be more defaulting to a cloud-first strategy because the business, for whatever reason, the business is dictating a cloud-first strategy that everything needs to move. And I just don't understand that, really, that driver. When people talk about cloud-first and equating it to public cloud and really pushing workloads into the cloud that really aren't suitable, things like low latency workloads or legacy workloads, and that are going to be more expensive to redevelop. A wonderful American Banker article today. If you haven't seen it, I strongly encourage you to go to American Banker today, and it really talks about it's not just security that's driving that decision. So if you want that article or you want me to point you to it, just link into me and let me know.
Okay, nice. Another question here. I mean, when you talk to financial services companies who are trying to do their digital transformation, they're evaluating different options. Can you kind of walk us through what would you recommend that they should look for, and kind of how would that process work with Nutanix?
Okay, so just say that to me one more time. I'm sorry.
If they're modernizing or trying to do some digital transformation, they engage Nutanix. What do you all do with them to help them along that journey?
Oh yeah,
you go through a POC.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, we would take a typical journey. I mean, I think it's first incumbent upon us to truly understand the environment that currently exists. This is not a rip and replace type conversation. This is a land and expand type discussion. we need to understand the current environment. We need to understand, what workloads are orphaned or what workloads can be implemented. So we normally do start with that discussion. Then we start obviously with maybe a cloud economist type discussion. Then we start implementing in a targeted set of workloads as the infrastructure platform, the cloud infrastructure platform. And then from there, of course, there's usually a migration path. Sometimes we begin with virtual desktop integration with your end-user computing teams. Sometimes we start with databases and database provisioning. Sometimes we do things like blockchain labs and in really building the infrastructure for that. But ultimately, it's all with the vision in mind that we're moving it together in an enterprise architecture.
Absolutely. Yeah, great advice. And I mean, one of the best webinars I think I've done with Nutanix was actually with Steve Kaplan, who
he's great.
Wrote a book. Yeah, he wrote a book called The ROI Story. It's a free ebook from Nutanix that helps people analyze the ROI between public cloud and private cloud and hybrid cloud. And so it's a fascinating webinar, and it's a great book. In fact, I have a physical copy of it.
Yeah, but, Steve's great.
Yeah, I know he has a whole team of people who help companies do that sort of analysis.
Correct. The cloud economists.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, it's been really great having you on the event today. Great insight about financial services and what you're doing at Nutanix. Thank you so much, Kevin.
All right. Well, you guys have a great day.
Thank you. And thank you to Nutanix. Make sure that you download the handout that's there in your audience console in the Handouts tab. It's called Architecting the Digital Enterprise for Financial Services Companies. It's a really nicely done ebook, so make sure that you check that out. And now it's time for our first prize giveaway on the event today. We have an Amazon $500 gift card, and that is going out to, I'm not pausing for effect, I'm pausing for the name to come up. Here we go, Marcia Elliott of New Hampshire. Congratulations, Marcia Elliott of New Hampshire. We've got 2 more gift cards to give away on the event today, so make sure you stay tuned for those. All right, it's now time for our next presenter on today's Financial Services EcoCast. I'm excited to introduce Mr. Matt Keel, Director of Product Marketing at Sequence Security. Matt, are you there?
I sure am. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for being on, Matt. Good to have you. Go ahead and take it away.
Great. Thanks, everyone. As the slide says, I'm Matt Kyle. I'm with a little security company called Sequence Security. Director of Product Marketing here, and we are going to talk about the topic of preventing fraud caused by account takeovers. So account takeovers are a very common challenge in many industries, but particularly in financial services industries, obviously because of the money hidden behind those accounts. So real quickly, a little bit about Sequence Security, venture-backed security company out in Silicon Valley, California, focused on preventing automated attacks that might cause fraud or theft. We are managed by some industry veterans from both Palo Alto Networks and Symantec. Enough said about that. Let's get on to the meat of the matter. So many organizations are moving many of their applications to the web, right? And when I talk about applications, particularly in a financial services environment, those applications might be the ability for me to go in and transfer money in my Wells Fargo account or do retirement planning. Each one of these functions is considered an application, and I can access them using a web browser from my PC, using my mobile app, and if I am a partner, I might be using exposed APIs. For example, in the financial services industry, there's a common funds transfer protocol, OFX, that is API-based and used by many banks to transfer money. It's also very well documented and exposed, and so what you'll find in my presentation in a little bit, it's actually been used as an attack vector. And that's where we get into a little bit more detail. The financial services applications are high-profile targets. As I mentioned before, it's the money that's hidden behind it. The attackers will use a series of techniques, tools, infrastructure, and behaviors to launch these automated attacks against your public-facing applications. And, I'm going to dig into a little bit more about each one of the tools they might use. So stolen credentials. Every week, it seems that we see another data breach. Yesterday, you probably all saw that 250 million records Microsoft had exposed going as far back as 2005. They are the support records, complete with name and email address. Those credentials are used by attackers to then target other applications. The attackers are leveraging the fact that 53% or thereabouts of us reuse passwords. As often as you hear "don't reuse passwords," it's a very common mistake. Tools. So attackers will use off-the-shelf tools such as Sniper or Sentry MBA. These are predefined, commercially available tools. They're community supported that allow an attacker to target a website, for example, Wells Fargo or Bank of America, or even a mid-sized credit union, Alliant or Regions Bank. They'll target them with the credentials, distributing the attack across the infrastructure that you see in the bottom right-hand corner. These are, again, commercially available networks of compromised IP addresses. If you do a search for a bulletproof proxy, you'll find a whole list of proxies, services that an attacker can subscribe to. They market themselves they market the fact that they have hundreds of thousands of IP addresses distributed around the world that allow an attacker to anonymize and distribute the attack. And then behavior. The attackers will modify behavior, or they will do things like rotate the browser fingerprint. They'll do things like keyboard smashing techniques to get the prompt for a re-enter your password. They will modify their behavior in order to either hide or respond to being blocked. The ramifications of these attacks, it depends on the type of attack. The most common that we see in the financial services industry is account takeovers. We also see a fake account creation where they'll create a fake account in order to try and take advantage of perhaps sign-up bonuses, that type of thing. And then business logic abuse of the APIs themselves. That's the OFX example. Ultimately, it's either theft and or fraud is the end goal of these types of attacks. Again, I can't stress it enough, is that the challenge you face as a security practitioner or a financial industry managing these applications is the transactions look like they're legitimate. Right? If somebody is trying to log in, you don't want to block that login. And you don't know for sure whether that login is an automated, part of an automated attack, and it's a failed login, or whether it's a real person who's just forgotten their password. And so many times organizations will err on the side of not blocking these transactions for the risk of creating bad user experience. So it's very much a balancing act that folks have to strike. Now, let's go through an example. This is a Fortune 100 financial services customer of ours who had found that they were getting having an account takeover attacks and then funds transfer. So the attackers deconstructed the mobile app, found the login API, and then began their automated attack against that API. If they were successful in finding a valid user, and remember, it doesn't have to be a whole lot of valid users. It can be a small handful of valid users to be a successful attack. If they found a valid user, they would then immediately execute a funds transfer from that account that they had taken over across the OFX API into their own fake account, resulting in loss of those funds. So in this scenario, the APIs were targeted directly. So the key here for us as Sequence in being able to protect it was that the machine learning based approach that we took allowed us to see that API based traffic right alongside all of the browser based traffic. And detect and then prevent that attack. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. Now, if we take a step down, what we're seeing is a mid-sized, what I would say mid-sized credit unions or mid-sized financial services organizations. These are not the not the B of A's of the world or the Amexes of the world. These are Regions Bank or Alliant Credit Union, smaller, mid-sized credit unions. What we're seeing is an uptick in account takeovers. Not really sure the reasons why. The attackers might view them as lower profile targets, and as such, they might have a smaller security staff, a smaller budget, might not have the same levels of security and protection. Might be political climate. Some of our customers have seen traffic coming from nation states that the United States has not been kind to. Now because of the ability to distribute those attacks across the world, you don't really know if it's actually coming from that country or whether it's being routed through that country. But these are some of the possible reasons why. Now, if we look at what I did is the most common attack, as I mentioned, is our account takeovers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about three different account takeover attacks in customer examples. So in this particular attack, the unique characteristic that I saw in the data was the massive global distribution of the attack. So the attackers used a combination of infrastructure and tools to distribute 1.4 million requests across 56,000 IP addresses. And those IP addresses were distributed globally from Vietnam, United States, China, and Canada. So it's a very global distribution of the attack, which in some respects is one of the characteristics that we're able to see and begin to look at it more seriously to determine if the attack is malicious or legitimate. The behavior that the attackers exhibited, not very sophisticated, so there were no user agent or browser rotation efforts. The logins were at what would appear to be odd times for the particular geographic location. And the credentials that were used were primarily email-based. The username was primarily email-based, which in many financial services industries is no longer allowed. And so it was very easy to determine the malicious nature. When you look at all of these different things, it was very easy for us to determine the malicious nature of the attack. In the second example, in this particular account takeover example, the unique characteristic was that the attackers targeted the Chrome mobile browser. So it's a little bit more sophisticated effort than the first example that we showed. The attackers used very sophisticated programmatic rotation of the user agent. They were generating unique signatures to spoof the Chrome or mimic the Chrome mobile browser. The mistake that they made really is they used an obsolete version of HTTP. So this might be a function of the tool that they used, the source code that they might have grabbed off the hacker community. It might have been a new or inexperienced attacker. Not really sure, why, but this was an immediate red flag. The infrastructure they used were this is very interesting. This is a little bit, more. The infrastructure was a little bit more focused on private private proxies as opposed to the previous slide, which were more bulletproof proxies, public, if you will. OVH and Online SaaS are two French providers. DigitalOcean and Amazon were the other infrastructure providers that we saw the IP addresses coming from. The third example, the unique characteristic was the fingerprint, the browser fingerprint rotation that they used, and the fact that it was heavily U.S.-based. Now, both of these financial services organizations that I'm talking about here are U.S.-based, so this one would make a little bit more sense. The tools that they used, the behavior that they exhibited, they focused on Firefox version 66 and 2 versions of Chrome. They are fairly recent. I think 66 is about a year old. 71 and 74 are a little bit more recent. And then they rotated fingerprints across 120,000 different browser fingerprints. So that was the behavior that they used and the tools that they executed to perform this attack. The infrastructure was primarily distributed across United States residential IP addresses. So this would be defined as more of a bulletproof proxy environment. The proxies that I spoke about earlier, where they market themselves with thousands of IP addresses, those are where you'll find the residential IP addresses. These are, the garage door openers, your refrigerator, compromised Alexa or smart devices, compromised home routers. You get the idea. So these are very high-quality IP addresses for an attacker. When you think about a financial services organization, you think about online banking. If I'm logging in from my house, I'm going through my Comcast router. So if you are the security team on the financial services side and you see that traffic coming in from a residential IP address as opposed to some other commercial IP address or other location, you're going to err on the side of not blocking it. And so, again, this makes that challenge of determining legitimate versus malicious that much more difficult. So, how do we go about determining malicious from legitimate and helping you defend your public-facing applications? We take an AI-driven, artificial intelligence-driven approach. CQAI is the product, the heart of our product. It has been trained for the last 5 years in customer environments, so we have roughly 200 machine learning models that look at all of your web, mobile, and API-based traffic, looking at it from the characteristics that I mentioned previously, and I'll get into in just a moment. And then we basically will go through three steps really. We'll first discover all of the public-facing applications, building an intuitive sitemap, if you will, of all of the public-facing applications that are exposed on the internet. We'll then analyze that traffic, looking at the intent of each request. So this is where the machine learning algorithms really come into play. So we're going to be looking at the behaviors. We're going to be looking at where it's coming from. We're going to be looking at the tools in use, the infrastructure in use, and it will come up with a confidence score that will tell you whether that traffic is legitimate or malicious. And then you can take a number of steps. You can rate limit, you can geofence, you can block it, you can log it and just monitor, and you can send a deceptive response back to the attacker. So you can send a custom response back to the attacker that might indicate that they are being successful when really they're not. What that does is that allows you to put some guardrails around the attacker. If you outright block the attacker, for example, they will retool and try another vector. Sending a deceptive response back gives them the sense of being successful, and that it keeps them in their place, if you will. And then finally, you can also send the findings to another piece of your security infrastructure. So you can send it to a log analysis tool, a forensics tool. You can send it to the fraud department for additional validation and testing. Send it to another firewall or a WAF for enforcement there. So it's a REST-based API that allows you to integrate more tightly with your existing security infrastructure or IT infrastructure. So I kind of already touched on this, so I probably won't go through it in too much detail, but the AI engine does look at all four of the elements that I have talked about throughout the presentation, looking at the credentials, the tools in use, the infrastructure, and how the attackers behave. This is really the heart of how we go about determining malicious from legitimate. And you know, the key thing that we bring to the table that others do not is it's an AI-driven approach that can be deployed out of band. So there is no impact on your traffic flow, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. More importantly, it eliminates a lot of the penalties that JavaScript injection and mobile SDK integration methodologies require. That's the primary, those two elements are the primary mechanisms by which the first generation bot protection mechanisms would work. So you'd inject JavaScript into every single one of the web pages or applications that you want to protect, or you integrate the SDK into the mobile app. Now, the challenges there are that the page load speed is impacted. Your development cycles are impacted. And there's always the risk of missing one of the applications that is then deployed by that rogue department. And then it also impacts the user experience in that you might need to force the users to upgrade their mobile application. So some challenges. The AI-based approach that does not require instrumentation or integration does effectively bake security into your application workflow. I already talked a little bit about the machine learning rules that are customizable that will separate malicious from legitimate intent. And then it's a continual learning process. Each environment, as you might imagine, is going to be different. Retail is going to be different than financial services. Retail will see fake accounts, some account takeovers, and lots of content scraping. Financial services, it's primarily account takeovers. Very flexible deployment, so it's software-based. So it's actually a container Docker container that is deploys out into several different modules depending on whether you want to deploy it in your data center, in your public cloud, or a hybrid environment. And we've just released a SaaS offering where we manage the infrastructure, you manage the policies and the data, so it helps reduce the operational burden required to prevent these types of attacks. I already mentioned how it can integrate export information out. It can also import information in. So, for example, if you have a fraud department as a financial services, you have a fraud department that keeps track of all the failed users or fraudulent users. You can pull that data, that user database, into the product so that it can be used to compare against what we see coming across the actual login application of the website. Can import third-party threat feeds and that type of thing. As the diagram, fairly simplified diagram, it shows, we take a copy of the traffic off of your load balancer or your switch, analyzing it using the AI engine and the management, CQ Insight management. The findings are then sent to a small lightweight component that sits in line. That's where you see the bot defense and app firewall there in line. And we can respond, as I mentioned, using block, rate limit, geofence, and deception. Or you can send the findings to your security infrastructure. We've been around for a couple of years and have quite a few large Fortune 100 customers. I already talked a little bit about the financial services customer. They have 20 different applications, and before we came into that environment, roughly as high as 90% of the traffic to their logins were automated bots. So we're able to not only prevent the account takeovers that I talked about earlier, but are also able to reduce the amount of traffic hitting their infrastructure, which is often a side benefit. A large retailer whose loyalty points was very lucrative and could be turned directly into cash. We helped this retailer stop that loyalty point fraud, protecting roughly 16 public-facing applications on their website successfully. And then a social network. This one is a interesting one in that the account takeovers were then used. The successful accounts that were taken over were then used to commit romance scam. So the relationships were established. Over time, the request for money came in, and the unsuspecting person on the other end who thought that they were in a relationship was scammed out of money. On average, the romance scams that had been successful previous to Sequence, it was roughly $12,000 per incident. So we were able to eliminate those romance scams from that environment. Different examples, all very much focused on preventing automated attacks using the AI-based approach. As I mentioned, we just rolled out a SaaS offering. You can try it for free now, a free 30-day trial. You can sign up there or right off the website. It'll take if you're interested in doing this, it takes about a day for us to, spin up the environment. Basically, what we will do is, if you're using a CDN, we'll redirect the traffic from your CDN to Sequence and then onto the origin. We have documented integrations with Akamai, Cloudflare, and Amazon CloudFront, as well as Fastly. So it's fairly easy to get started if you're interested in taking us up on that offer. With that, we are going to open it up for questions.
Absolutely, yeah. Great presentation. While we do some Q&A, I'm just going to bring up this poll question. It says, what additional information would you like about the Sequence solution? So let's see. First question that came in, they're asking, how is Sequence deployed?
Sure. Deployed, I kind of touched on that a little bit. We can go into a little bit more detail, but it is depends on the environment. It can be deployed into your private data, into your physical data center, your traditional data center. It can be deployed in the public cloud environment. Most common is AWS, but certainly can be deployed in GCP as well as Azure. And then we have a SaaS offering. So it's software-based. It's delivered as a single Docker container. And then as it's deployed, it breaks out into a series of different modules that are deployed out of band and or in line, depending on the direction that the customer needs to go. If they want to go to monitor-only mode, then there's no inline component deployed. If they want to go into a defense mode, there's a small lightweight component that takes action depending on the findings that are found in the out-of-band analysis.
Okay. So what about if somebody has an existing, security infrastructure? How does Sequence integrate with that?
Sure. REST, it is, from day one, we've had a series of REST-based APIs, so we can take all the findings and send the findings out to an existing firewall, an existing WAF. You can send the findings to your SIM, ArcSight, folks like ArcSight or Splunk. You can send the findings to your fraud department for some additional analysis and verification. So fairly open platform that allows us to tie, make the rest of your security infrastructure a bit stronger in improving your security posture, if you will.
Yeah. It sounds very easy to get started. I'm sure this could help a lot of financial services companies out there. I'm curious, with so many security solutions available, what do you feel like makes Sequence really unique?
Well, so you're absolutely right. I came from, I've been in the security industry for 20 odd years, and there are many different point solutions out there. When you look at the automated, the thing that you have to look at is the type of attack here. These look like legitimate transactions, so it's very hard for organizations to separate legitimate from malicious. So we separate ourselves. So there's a select set of vendors that will are taking that challenge on. They're the Shapes of the world, the Distill Networks of the world, the Akamais of the world. All of them primarily use JavaScript and mobile SDK integration. So they need to integrate into your applications to collect the telemetry, right? So the JavaScript is collecting the telemetry that they're trying to analyze to turn on the public-facing web apps to determine malicious versus legitimate. Same premise for the mobile SDK. Now, I didn't mention APIs there because they really don't do a very good job of catching the APIs, and many of the attackers are going directly to APIs. So our differentiation is that we take the ML AI-based approach and analyze your traffic out of band so we don't inject any delay or latency, and then send those findings to a small lightweight component that takes enforcement. That means we can look at all three types of application endpoints: API-based, mobile-based, and web-based. So that really is very much our differentiation from some of the other folks that are out there.
Okay, yeah, that's an important point there. So really easy to get started, can protect a financial services company from so many different attacks. It's a great presentation, Matt. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
Thanks very much, folks. Take care.
For more information on the Sequence security solution, check out their website. Also, check out the handout that's available for download there in your audience console, protecting financial services mobile applications and APIs from automated attacks. It goes into great detail on how exactly that works. And now it's time for our next prize drawing. We have an Amazon $500 gift card going to Chad Kincaid from Texas. Congratulations, Chad Kincaid from Texas. We've got one more gift card to give away still on today's event, so make sure you stay tuned for that. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next presenter on today's security or financial services EcoCast, and that is Mr. Wolfgang Gerlich, advisory CISO at Duo Security. Wolfgang, are you there?
I am. Thank you so much. Can you hear me all right?
Thank you for being on. I can, yes, sir. Take it away.
Good deal. Well, thank you all for joining this webcast. It's really my pleasure to be speaking with you today. I am a former CISO from the financial services space. For many years, I was responsible for securing a money management firm. And a lot of the challenges that we're hearing today and a lot of the conversation that's been going on is near and dear to my heart as I remember all the various regulatory risks and the threat actors and the account takeovers and all that great stuff. But today, what I am here to talk to you about is leveraging identity and access management for Zero Trust. So I am with Duo. Duo is a security vendor. We provide the first stage of identity and access management, most well known for our multi-factor authentication, also our single sign-on, the analytics that go around behind that, and of course we are very excited to be a part of the shift into Zero Trust. But for most of this conversation, this is a little bit more high level. This is a little bit more on the strategic side. This is a little bit more, frankly, if I was sitting in your seat, what I'd want to hear, because we've all been talking about Zero Trust for a long time, and it's not always entirely clear what it is, right? It's obviously not a product. You're not going to go out and buy a Zero Trust appliance and rack it in your data center or spin it up in your cloud. It's not necessarily a technology stack, although certainly there's been a lot of components in the technology stack that have been evolving and adapting into a Zero Trust model. And it's not necessarily a security standard, although there's been some fantastic work, and I'll circle back in this in a couple slides, around standardizing what Zero Trust means. Predominantly, it's emerging as a security framework. I joined Duo predominantly to work on Zero Trust because I believe that within 5 years, people are going to be talking about Zero Trust in much the same way they talk about least privilege. Or if you've got as much gray hair as I do, you may remember back in the late 80s, early 90s when we were all arguing about RBAC, and was RBAC just another marketing hype, or was it really going to become the standard? I think Zero Trust is poised to take its place among those types of security concepts and security fundamentals. Part of the reason for that is, as we all know, everything's been shifting, right? In the past decade, ever since the iPad came out in 2010, more and more organizations have went to BYOD. The most recent statistic I saw is 1 in 5 employees are using 6 or more devices to get their job done. And needless to say, those are not 6 or more company-provided devices. At the same time, we've rushed forward to adopt cloud, both cloud hosting and near and dear to this particular presentation, cloud applications. In the past, you would run everything in your own data center. We've reached a tipping point about midway through the last decade where many organizations were making that decision. Is it cloud first or is it still on-prem? And of course, by the end of the decade, The majority of organizations are running over 1,000 cloud apps. The average is 1,400 and change. And a typical employee with their 6 or more devices is accessing 36 cloud applications in any given week to get their workflow done. So we've had this great shift, and that's not even counting things like IoT devices and all the other various equipments in our environment. And what this has meant is the day and age where Anonymous was attacking us over Operation Wall Street, and we stood firm between us and the horde with our firewall and a lever. That day is really past, and we've had to look at different ways where we could wrap in security and we could wrap in some controls. So as we've been looking at these types of business challenges like digital transformation, cloud first, et cetera, have really challenged the security team to figure out where can we inject control and where can we inject assurances to make sure that the people that are on our systems are really the people they say they are. We just heard a great session on account takeover, and it's so true. It's a sophisticated, sufficiently advanced criminal is nearly indistinguishable in most cases from a user. So we've got to figure out how to protect against those account takeovers and recognize when that person isn't who we think they are, or when that person is who they say they are, but they no longer have our best interests in mind, such as the malicious insider-style threats. So Zero Trust has been coming up for quite a while. It started off, with the Jericho Forum. Forrester coined the term in 2009, and Google had built out BeyondCorp. So there's been a lot of momentum pushing this conversation forward. The Forrester Wave came out last year, Q4 of 2019, and Duo, as part of Cisco, was very excited to be recognized as the market leader in this space. And again, this was one of the reasons why last year I joined Duo to see where we can go. If you do want to learn more about the standards of Zero Trust, please do check out this NIST document, 800-207. It's currently in draft. This outlines their standing on how Zero Trust will operate. And again, I harken back to the day and age of RBAC, right? No one really believed RBAC was more than hype or more than marketing or anything until NIST came out with their seminal paper. So I feel that NIST dropping this paper has really paved the way for Zero Trust to take that place as a fundamental. But what are some of the principles of Zero Trust? Well, one, the perimeter is any place where you make an access control decision. So these access control decisions that we used to make based on where you're at in the network, are you in the trusted zone or the non-trusted zone? Obviously, they're moving away, and now that we've got this situation where the user can be anywhere, they can be on any device, and they can be accessing any number of 1,000 different cloud apps, it's a matter of looking at that access control and enforcing controls at that time of authentication. The next thing is visibility drives decisions and informs policy. Smart CISOs have known this for a while. Data-driven decisions are so fundamentally vital in overall security, but also in terms of security within the Zero Trust state. And here we're talking about visibility in terms of people, right? Oftentimes we think users are employees, but contractors and vendors and partners, I mean, the list goes on. We're talking about visibility in terms of devices. I mentioned, 6 or more devices per user. Oftentimes we've got maybe a strong MDM policy, maybe we got a strong BUID policy, but there's always gaps in that. So how can we make sure we got good visibility across all our devices? We're talking about visibility in terms of applications. Where are these people going? What are these thousands of applications? Are they on our approved list? Do we have some control and some influence over what data is going to those applications? So visibility across those 3 different planes so that we can identify where those risks are and act accordingly. It's also this concept of trust not being binary or permanent. In identity and access management, oftentimes it's you. We trust you. We hired you. We trust you. Here's your groups. Go forth and do. And we trust you until you get the certification where your boss or the application owner, business owner is like, do we really still trust you? Do you still need this access? And we've used that, right? However, that could be, and oftentimes is, 3 months, 6 months, a year. It can be a very long period of time. And during that time, it's binary. We trust you. You're on. You're good. It might as well be permanent if you think about how quick attacks can go if we're only checking in, once a year. So it's very important that we slice and dice that accordingly and look continuously. Ownership is not a control. So much of our control infrastructure has been based on, hey, I own that device, I own that server, it's in my four walls, I built that data center with my own bare hands, and by God, it's secure. But we need to move beyond ownership being control as we look out into the new reality of how these systems are being built. And then access decisions are based on reestablishing trust every time. So how can every time a user goes to log into an application, can we make sure that they are who they say they are, that they're supposed to be connecting, that we don't have any obvious fraud, the whole, oh, you logged in over there in New York, now you logged in over here in San Francisco, an hour later, something's wrong. Those types of things. How can we make sure that you're authenticating and logging in using an application from a device that's secure? We just saw recently this Microsoft vulnerability that put at question the fundamental identification of who we're talking to, right, by web browsers and whatnot. Put in question the fundamentals of certificate authentication and identification. How can we make sure that those types of devices that are vulnerable to that aren't accessing these applications that might not be the applications we think they are? So we need ability to wrap the perimeter around the access control decision, reevaluate trust regularly, and look at it each time a user is doing something on the authentication plane. And then finally, we need a way to act, some form of containment, be it least privilege, be it minimizing what applications they can get to if there's something funky or something strange, be it changing the devices that the end users can use to access. Any number of different ways. Containment as an action, as an activity that happens to reduce the risk, to contain the risk, and to hopefully, done correctly, in collaboration with the user, create a situation where that risk is remediated and the organization is protected before the access goes on. So those are some of the principles behind Zero Trust. It's fundamentally when someone is accessing a resource, or when something's accessing a resource, be it a whole range of people, be it a whole range of different applications, or your work assets themselves, your equipment in your workplace, etc. So from a Cisco perspective, recognizing that these risks are out there, we tend to bucket it up into three main areas. We look at the workforce, which I've been covering pretty extensively, which is people accessing applications. We look at the workload, which is an application accessing another application service. Think about any one of these cloud applications that we use every single day. Those of us who've done development work or done, architecture work or whatnot know that there's, N-tier applications, the web tier, talking the database tier, talking the processing tier, all those different application workloads. The security around workload is ensuring that that workload is authenticated before it goes ahead and performs actions. And of course, the authentication is regularly checked. And then the workplace, we're talking about all the equipment that is in our workplace. In the financial services world, it's probably a lot of your IoT devices, heavy-duty printers, those sort of things, trading terminals. Manufacturing, that would be your plant floor. Healthcare would be your medical devices. The point is each one of those devices, making sure it's authenticated, and that authentication forms a control point where we can ensure that device is still secure and is not doing something insurance. So when we look at attacks that are targeting identity or apps or devices, we can look at the appropriate zero trust approach, be it on the workforce, the workload, or the workplace, to close those risks. Now, in terms of the identity side, I'm going to skip ahead to that part right now. In terms of the identity side, a lot of this is figuring out where our IAM programs plug into the zero trust model. Obviously, we've got the ability to do provisioning. Most organizations have the ability to do certification, to do access reviews. So where in the stack does zero trust line up with the form and functionality of a zero trust framework? And part of that is figuring out what threats that we're actually trying to look at and where those threats come into play. So from a design perspective, oftentimes what I think about is how can I make it easier for my users to know where they're at, to know where they're going? How can I make it easier for my users to do choices that lead to more secure environments, to have defaults that lead to more secure choices? And at the flip side, make it harder for the criminals by making it more confusing, more intensive, driving up the amount of time they need to spend. So there's a variety of different ways that we can leverage the IAM stack to go ahead and do that. So obviously on the front end, we're talking about things like strong authentication. If I need to trust a user, sure, we can ask for a password, but that's not necessarily as strong as a multi-factor authentication by a token. It's not necessarily as strong as multi-factor authentication by biometrics. So we can look at what is the correct level of strength for authentication on the identity stack and use that appropriate level of authentication to match the risk of the activity they're trying to perform. Single sign-on is another aspect of that, centralizing the sign-on activity. It's also one of the few areas in security where users actually thank you. Like, oh, you made my life easier. That's so great. And at the same time, we're, of course, making the life harder on the criminals by consolidating the authentication and putting in place that control point. Device management, either through formal MDM, so you get the full stack, or through a lighter variety of device insights, effectively checking the security posture of that device, the security hygiene of that device, and using that to make a trust-based decision as to whether or not to allow people to log in. Conditional access brings together a lot of these earlier aspects, right? Are they coming in from an SSL portal? Have we strongly authenticated them? Are they on a clean device, a known device, one of our own devices? Where are they logging in from? Is this an area that they normally log in from? There's a variety of different aspects in identity stack that we can look at around conditional access to make a good decision as to whether or not to let that authentication continue. Your identity provider, of course, it's my view that that should be separate from a lot of these other things that we've talked about in terms of having good, defense in depth and segregation of duties. But your identity provider, having that central view into the user, having the central view of the user's properties, as well as having the groups that go ahead and define those permissions and what they have privileges to. And what I've started to see is some very interesting approaches around zero trust, where the containment is not necessarily only on the device authentication side, which I mentioned earlier, but is also on the side of we're going to remove this user from these privileged groups until such a time that we've reasserted trust with them. Identity governance, your IGA platform, which would be able to enact that sort of change, right? The IGA sees that there's a risk either through the certification process, either through a trust signal, either through an API, and then can go ahead and change what access in the IDP that the user has to the applications downstream. Now, there's many ways to evaluate trust. Is there malware on the device? Is the device running a firewall? Is there any indication that the firewall might have been breached? Is the device beaconing out to known command and control malware sites, which can be distinguished by IP address or what they're looking up on DNS? Are they going to cloud applications they shouldn't, which you could catch with CASB? Is there indications that they've been phished? Is there, incoming malware in their email box, or is there a bunch of, phishing emails or suspicious emails flowing from their mailbox? And of course, over all of it, the user and entity behavior analytics, some of that more in-depth ML AI work that can be done on a variety of different indicators and a variety of different logs to figure out whether or not everything is right. So you got the identity stack, which is your enforcement and action layer, and you got this evaluation of trust layer, which can feed into the conditional access and can feed into the IGA to enact change to make sure that the appropriate level of trust is granted to users and is restricted when things seem suspicious. So I know I'm about up on time here. In terms of security principles, what we're looking at is a lot of the same things that we've done historically, but only quicker and at scale in an automated way. So least privilege, thou shalt have these privileges. Zero trust means, do we still trust you to use these privileges, right? It also plugs in segregation of duties. It can be enforced with RBAC and ABAC, and it still should be done in play with a regular IAM certification program. So you still have the manual eyes on it, making sure that people are at the appropriate levels and that the compliance and regulatory requirements are met. I think the key thing from a takeaway perspective is with IAM, looking at the automation and integration components of your IDP and your IGA to support some of those zero trust principles that I opened up with, right? How are we going to do the regular identity checks? How are we going to act and react, hopefully in an automated way, when there is something suspicious and we need to take action? So that is the way of leveraging IAM in a zero trust approach. And again, much of this can be done with the Cisco stack. So with that as a high-level journey, and if you'll keep an eye on the Duo website, there's actually a white paper that I'm publishing out here in the next few weeks about this. There's an entire journey that can be taken to establish this, such as establishing user trust, getting your arms around the application and device activity, ensuring that you've got trustworthy devices, that you got visibility to hygiene, and then enforcing policies around that to do that continuous validation and to start progressing on that journey towards a zero trust architecture. With that, I will open it up to Q&A. So I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Absolutely, yeah. Great presentation, Wolfgang. We do have some questions for you. While we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll question for the audience. What additional information would you like about the Duo security solution? And so let's see, first question that came in here, they're asking about is there a difference between on-premises and cloud IAM for zero trust?
There's an ongoing debate with IAM platforms, much like there is with every technical stack for the past 5 years, as to whether the right approach is on-prem or in the cloud. I think the fundamental aspect is, does the IAM platform that you're selecting offer the integration components, so it can consume some of those trust sources I mentioned, and the automation components, so that it can act on signals of trust to reduce groups and whatnot. I think that the features and functionality is much more important than the hosting model.
Okay. Good clarification there. So another question with IAM, how do you balance security with accessibility when blocking access prevents work from being done?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and that's something that we're always really concerned about, because fundamentally, as a security officer or security professional, our goal is to protect the organization, and that's different than protecting the technology, right? So we can protect the technology by blocking access, but if that person was about to execute a trade and now they can't, and that it's cost us $500,000 in penalties, obviously we've not done a good job in protecting the organization. The important way to address that balance between usability and security is through the applications of carefully tested plans and tested policies, so that when those decisions are made to protect and prevent a workflow from doing, it's only made at a point where we're really clear that this is a suspicious and at-risk activity.
Okay. Got it. Let's see. Another question. What impact does Zero Trust IAM do Zero Trust IAM controls have on compliance and audit?
Yeah, and this is an area where we are still going through. Traditionally in the financial services audit space, it's been my experience that audit tends to be a couple years behind the technology. I remember when cloud came out, there was a lot of confusion initially with the auditors. So when I mentioned the certification process needs to be upheld, what I mean to say in there is the traditional IAM controls, regulatory demanded, audit blessed, those traditional controls still need to be performed. And at the same time, when we start bringing this automation and this quicker reaction where the machine is acting on our behalf, we need to have good logs and good evidence so that we can explain that to the auditors. It's going to take a couple years of Zero Trust being implemented and the education to go out before I think the auditors are going to be comfortable with some of this level of automation.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Okay, let's see. I guess the last question we probably have time for, and that is, how do people get started with Duo Security? Is there a trial, evaluation? How does that work?
Yeah, you can go to duo.com and sign up for a trial if you'd like to get in. There's also some online demos that can be perused and will demonstrate a lot of this front-end side of Zero Trust for the workforce.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's all the time we have for live Q&A, but a great presentation, Wolfgang. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
For more information on the Duo Security solution, check out the handout that's available for download there in your audience console. That is the Zero Trust Guide, Going Beyond the Perimeter. And you can download that. It goes into exactly how Zero Trust works, benefits for you, the different stages of Zero Trust, and more. So make sure you check that out. And, of course, also visit duo.com to sign up for the free trial. All right, and with that, it's time for our final gift card announcement. We have another Amazon $500 gift card going to Tom Neal of Pennsylvania. Congratulations, Tom Neal of Pennsylvania. All right, before you go, I want to remind you to check out the 10 on Tech podcast in the iTunes store. Follow Actual Tech Media on LinkedIn. If you are a potential sponsor of an upcoming event, email us at connect@actualtechmedia.com, and we'd love to chat with you about how you can present on an upcoming MegaCast or EcoCast. And finally, I hope that you'll join us on our next event, which is Ensuring Trust and Security in Enterprise IT and the Cloud. You'll hear from KnowBe4, SolarWinds, Foranix, Okta, Duo, Rapid7, and Zerto on that event. You'll be automatically redirected after this event ends to our events center, events.actualtechmedia.com. Thank you so much for joining us on today's Modernizing and Securing Financial Services Technology Environments EcoCast event. We hope that you had a good time, hope that you learned a lot, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.